Hello, everyone. It's that time again for adults to talk about cool stuff. This is ATACS episode 6, January the 29th, 2017. We're almost through the first month of the year. And I'm your host, Paul from Atlanta. Joining me is Mr. Flex from Raleighwood.
Yo.
What's up, Flex?
Not much. I'm feeling a lot better this week. Not as tired as last time. I'm good to go.
Excellent.
2017 is only improving.
I'm gonna move right on from that comment and say hello to Will from Greenville. Hey, Will.
Yeah, I can't concur that 2017 is improving. But we're making do.
You can join me on my ship of sadness as we sail through what is shaping up to be the most newsworthy year of all the years. Mr. Ryan from New York City. Hello, Ryan. Give us some positive vibes.
Hello again. We might have to sail a different discussion for that ship.
And last but not least, Mr. Nate from Wendell, North Carolina. What's up, Nate?
Hey, yeah, I'm back.
You're back. How was your vacation?
It wasn't really a vacation. I just missed the last one, but it's been good. New semester, new classes.
Excellent.
Get moving.
So, for any of our first-time tuners in, this is ATACS. We're mostly a video game podcast, although we do delve into other things from time to time. But we're going to talk about video games. And I'm going to start. Been playing some more Doom, which is a lot of fun. I've gotten to the point in the game where I feel like that I have hit the difficulty curve. So I actually have found myself stuck at this one particular sequence, and pretty late in the game now. And
can you describe the sequence a little bit?
Yeah, so this is near the end of the game. This is after you come back and everything is destroyed. And then you get into, I think it's the Argent Labs is the name of the level that I'm on right now. I'm trying to pull it up.
That sounds like a level name from Doom.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. It's the Lazarus Labs. So that's mission number 9. Small spoilers. There are 13 missions in Doom. I'm at number 9, and the one spot that I'm in, I think it's just a matter of I need to run backwards in the level to pick up some ammo, because I know that I left some on the ground because I didn't need it at the time. But the spot that I'm in is it's a relatively small room with guys that like to run at you horns out first, and I mean I can dodge for a while, but the problem is that I run out of bullets, and when you run out of bullets, it makes it kind of hard to shoot things.
You need to rev up that chainsaw.
Yeah, you just got to chainsaw some fools.
Pop the bullet pinatas.
See, that's the problem. I have one fuel in my chainsaw, so I use that, and that's cool. And then I just run out of bullets again. I'm not quite sure how many dudes spawn in this room, but it's a big number. And at least once I've blown myself up with a rocket launcher, so that's harkening back to my GoldenEye days, which I'm sure Will could probably shed some insight there. But yeah, it's actually kind of nice that it's the difficulty's gone up a little bit. I didn't think the game was terribly easy, but I was sort of waiting for the challenge to kick in, because I always felt like that the upgrades and the new weapons were outpacing the types of demons and the encounters. So I feel like now I do have a lot of tools, and now they're throwing a lot more of the game at me, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So
they do a really good job of that game at like simultaneously making you feel like you continue to get more powerful with your weapons and upgrades, and then also ramping up the complexity and difficulty of the encounters with like just making bigger rooms with more demons and more. It's the variety of the demons that make them tricky too. Like if the whole room was just one kind of demon, like yeah, it could be tough, but like you would find something that worked and just do it. But it's that towards the end of the game, they really just start throwing every type of demon into the encounters at once, and because they all behave so differently, like that becomes a really tricky thing to deal with.
Yeah, and they also just gave me the BFG, and I'm not gonna lie, I was very excited to get that, and I might have used some of the ammunition in places I really didn't need to, but hot damn, that was fun for about 90 seconds. And now there's like all these encounters where I'm like, man, it'd be really useful if I had a BFG shot right now, but that one particular imp really needed to die like 2 rooms ago.
Pro tip. Imps are, despite being like one of the first enemies you encounter, imps are actually the most dangerous enemy in the game.
They're assholes.
Yeah, if you don't deal with them first, they will just constantly run around and poke you with fireballs. Like, they should be target number one.
Yeah, I had this really funny encounter where I'm like paying attention to one of the bigger dudes, and like I see this imp, but I'm just leaving him alone because he's just an imp. I'll kill him in 2 shots in a second. And then he runs all the way across the room and just like I was down at red health, and he just runs all the way across the room and just slashes my face off. And like I watched him the whole time, thinking I should shoot that guy.
Yep.
But I never did, and then I didn't have a face anymore.
Yep, imps are the annoying guys who just run around everywhere and are just constantly harassing you, and it's like it's really easy to get like stuck on like, oh, there's a Hell Knight there, I should shoot him, he's big and scary, but like he's a lot easier to avoid than the imps that are just constantly at your heels.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm still having a lot of fun with that.
What's your favorite weapon? I gotta know.
I mean, right now it's probably the heavy machine gun with the rocket attachment.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like that's just one of those things that it just feels good.
I mean,
and
you say heavy machine gun with rocket attachment, I'm on board.
Yeah.
That's a good sentence.
Yeah, I'm not as much of a fan of the plasma rifle. I feel like it's just the projectiles just move too slow. But
I like the stun on it.
The stun's good. But the heavy assault rifle with the micro missiles is definitely my go-to. But then whenever I'm feeling especially mean, I just pull out the chain gun in the mobile turret mode, and boy, that is exciting. And then I run out of bullets in like 30 seconds, but those are 30 glorious seconds.
But that was 30 seconds of demons dying really fast.
Yes.
Yeah, the weapons in that game are great.
Yeah, and so sort of on the exact opposite of what Doom is, I played some Space Farmers, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know where Space Farmers came from. I don't actually remember buying it, and I don't really remember anyone telling me to buy it. But I woke up one morning and I had 2 copies of Space Farmers, so I gave one to Steph. And boy, Space Farmers, that is not a game that I ever want to pick up again. We played for 45 minutes, and we got through several of the levels, but we got to this one puzzle that just felt like we figured out the solution to the puzzle, and then it was just a lot of trying to get the game mechanics, which felt really clunky, just to sort of like work with us. And it was just frustrating to actually know what to do, but then the game's just not letting you do it because it just doesn't control well to me. So we played that for 45 minutes. We beat a few levels. We put it down. I think I can safely say that I have completed my time with Space Farmers.
I like the idea that it just magically appeared in your library.
I mean, it really did. I went back and, Steam says that I added it to my library like December 23rd, which would have been around the Steam sale time. Sure enough, there was a charge on my credit card for like $3. So I must have bought it, but I have no recollection of doing so. So yeah, but I mean, I didn't really enjoy it that much, but I know that Flex, you and Will played this, right?
We did.
What did you guys think of it?
Let's say it had some interesting ideas. I totally agree. Just from a pure execution standpoint, I absolutely think the game's very clunky and is frustrating to play in a lot of spots. Like, I think the movement speed is I think that movement speed's atrocious. I think a lot of the interactions just don't feel good, just from a feel standpoint. Like, I think a lot of the construction of that game is actually pretty poor. It has some interesting ideas in there, from like co-op mechanic standpoints, in the sense of like a lot of the times the 2 players have very different items that mean they have different functionality. Right. But unlike from a core game standpoint, like, it's just those ideas deserve to be in a better game, because most of the act of playing that game is not great.
What do you think, Will? Are you kind of on board with that, or I know you have incredible patience with bad games.
So. I really do. And I think it's a badge of honor sometimes that I can stomach the worst. But with that one, I think there aren't a lot of games that are designed from the ground up for co-op that have a unique co-op focus. So most of the time when you're playing a co-op game, and I play a lot of co-op games, you are actually both doing the same thing. You're both just two people in the world doing the exact same thing. And so I really like co-op games. Another one I played with Fowler Flex last year, Clandestine, was what they consider an asymmetrical co-op game as well, where you've got two people that are doing kind of different things, and you need both of them to survive. So I really like it, even when terrible small developers really go out of their way to try and create something that really requires both players. So I don't know if you did one of the puzzles, where you had one person who had like the blue vision and one person who had the red vision, and the red person could only see the red mines that were in front of the blue guy, and vice versa. So you kind of.
No, we didn't get to that one, but that just sounds infuriating to me.
Right. So
that one you can actually kind of break because you have, I forget what kind of gun you have, but you basically have a gun that you can just kind of spam, and you can tell when it's hitting something you can't even see. So you could actually totally cheese that one just solo.
Okay.
Great. Yeah. And so some people who don't like to do things cooperatively might come up with some idea like that, so they don't have to rely on their buddy. But
burn.
No, but
hey, it was the laser. We had the laser. That's how this ended up happening, because that laser is very dangerous. You can kill each other that way. So it almost seemed like it was easier just for one person to go ahead and just more or less scan with the laser to check for enemies, even if you couldn't see them.
Yeah, and I will say that.
What does this have to do with farming in space, by the way?
Yeah,
it's everything to do with farming in space, Ryan. You see, there are these pigs and these cows, and they're in space, and there are buttons you need to put them on to shut off the lasers.
Yeah.
Basically, have you never been to a farm, Ryan?
I think what they're riffing off
not
of,
in space, at least.
I think what they're riffing off of is the idea that a lot of really rural, isolated farmers are the ones that typically say they saw spaceships or they've been abducted by aliens. And so basically these aliens have abducted these two farmers along with a lot of livestock and different things from the farm. And you're trying to escape the ship that sort of has, among other things, a lot of these leftover pieces. And we've probably already spent more time talking about space farmers than anyone has ever spent.
I was just going to say, maybe we've spent more time on space farmers than I intended.
But I will say
we need to have a special space farmers devoted podcast.
But I will say my issues with it were, one, I thought there's the weird way they do the level selection.
Yes.
It starts out where you just pick. It gives you 5 random levels, and then you have to complete 10 total levels before you can actually start choosing your own route. So unavoidably, you end up playing the same levels over and over again, which really makes no particular sense. And the other thing I didn't like was, Flex will remember this, there was one particular puzzle where you are forced to be, and this was Paul, this is exactly what you were talking about, where you were on this laser and you're trying to blow up these barrels with the laser. And it's physically impossible to move your mouse so subtly that the laser actually controls the way it's supposed to.
Right.
So that was absolutely crazy. I mean, we spent 5 minutes trying to do that one puzzle with me just trying to move my mouse the tiniest bit. The other thing that's terrible is the music. The music is god-awful. God-awful, banjo-tastic.
I don't know what you're talking about, Will. That music was amazing.
It's really
you guys
I actually forgot
really
about
selling
that.
this game for me. I think I should just go out and play it right now.
Yeah, but the rest of it,
how you feeling about
ideas, I liked. I will say
Paul,
that I
you
like
said
some
you
of
were
the
up
ideas.
for round 2.
No, actually, I didn't say that at all, Ryan. I believe what I said is that my time with space farmers is now thoroughly completed.
I'm glad you brought
that's
up
all I have.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the level structure part, because there's no reason for them to do it that way. But ultimately, I agree with Will that game has some really good asymmetrical co-op ideas, but I think it deserves a better game around the ideas.
Right.
Yeah. So just the last thing before we're gonna move on to somebody else is I do think, Will, you said one thing that really is true, is that whenever a developer is building a game from the bottom up to be like the asymmetrical co-op game, that is a really cool thing. This game does have some really cool ideas, but the execution is just very lacking.
Right.
So like it's not all bad, but it's also one of those where you just come on, man, just walk a little faster and just don't ask me to get down to pinpoint accuracy when you gave me a club,
Right.
So anyway, that's really all that I've been playing that I wanted to bring up here. I've been playing a few other random games, just sort of off and on, but nothing really worth discussion. So, Mr. Flex, what you been up to?
Yeah, so it's been 2 weeks since we podcasted. The first week I blitzed a large game that I will get to in a second, but this past week I picked up, my gaming time was pretty slight, so I picked up Picross 3D Round 2 multiple times to just kind of fill a half hour here and there. And the more I play that game, the more I'm realizing that that's just a really good Picross game. Picross fundamentally is always been really good, but this is a really good version of it. Like, they've done smart things. It's only the second 3D one, but adding a second color to the 3D actually does make a really big difference. And I've gotten pretty into that game over this past week. If you're anyone who likes logic puzzles, that's a really strong game. I'll probably keep rolling with that as well.
Has anyone else here played a Picross game? Maybe Nate?
Yeah, I've played some of them, not as nearly as much, but I have not played the new one. Is the main difference, I feel like I remember seeing when that game was coming out, is the main difference the color thing? You color the blocks as you go?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so in normal Picross, you're filling in blocks, but now when you fill them in, you're filling in one of two colors.
Right.
And the numbers indicating blocks to fill in are also colored. So one row, you could have a number that'll be 3 blue and 3 orange, or the two colors.
Does it feel like an extra level of challenge, or does it feel like it's sort of easy to just pick out the colors and solve it right away as far as the color part goes?
I feel like it makes it tougher.
Okay.
In fact, there are some puzzles that'll have very little of one of the two colors, and I'll kind of nail down those colors early on, and then whenever it gets to that point, I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm back to a regular Picross 3D puzzle. This will be easier from here. I feel like
right.
I'm home free at that point. Adding
Okay.
a second color absolutely does make it tougher. It's really interesting, and they do they give you ways to mark spaces to be like, oh, this space is either orange or it's nothing. So they give you ways to mark that. So the process of going through and marking what spaces could be what colors adds a whole new layer of logic. So there are a lot of times where you can rule out squares with the dynamics of two colors that you couldn't have with just one color, and it makes it really interesting. I think this game's a smart way to evolve Picross whilst it's still being Picross, and I think that's the first time they've really done that with this franchise in a while.
Yeah,
so that's
other than probably taking it to the 3D version.
Yeah,
which
I think
was kind of different.
Yeah, I think the first time going to 3D was a new step, and then now this adding a second color is the second new step. Those are the two things they've done to Picross that have really shaken it up in a meaningful way. So that's cool to see.
Yeah, it seems neat. It's something I might pick up at some point. I'm not a huge Picross fan, but I enjoy a little bit of Picross here and there, and the wife really likes Picross, so yeah. It would probably get played regardless of how much time I put into it. So I'll probably pick that up at some point.
Yeah, if she liked the first 3D Picross, she'd like this one too.
Okay.
And then this weekend I started some other games, but I'll save those for next time. But the main game that I definitely put in the most time the past 2 weeks is I completed Final Fantasy 15.
So, early contender, 2017 Game of the Year? I think so.
First of all,
what?
it's not a 2017 game.
Yeah.
Second of all, even if it was, nope. I actually struggled down the home stretch of that game. I seriously considered stopping playing because that game really falls apart in a lot of ways the more you play it, or at least for me. And it has a neat setup and a neat world, and I feel like they deliver on almost none of it as the game goes on. I ended up being really bummed about a lot of different parts in that game, and it's been in development for so long, and it still feels unfinished. Like, it still feels very cobbled together and very weird. Like, my first, I don't know, 5 to 10 hours, I just kept thinking, like, man, this game is just weird. I don't know if I like it or dislike it or anything. It's like, the only thing I could think about it was that it was just weird.
Well,
and
I
then,
mean, let me jump in real quick just as a PSA. So Square Enix has announced that they are going to release a content patch that will add some additional storyline stuff near the end of that game. They're saying around chapter 13. I actually have not started playing this, so I don't exactly know what the chapter structure looks like. So is chapter 13 is that near the end? Is that in the middle? I mean, like
that is basically the end.
Yeah, there are 14
The
chapters.
last or almost.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they have announced that, but I don't know what any of that means. Just sort of like a PSA to our listeners. They are working on a content patch.
Yeah, I mean, that game needs some story patches because its story is atrocious. But even if its story...
I disagree with that, but
Oh, I feel pretty strongly about that. But even if they made the story good, like there are so many other problems. Like that's only one of many things that game needs help with. And the chapter 13 is by far the worst chapter in that game, and it's not because of story reasons. That chapter 13 is an abomination, to put it lightly, of just this long, uninteresting slog where they take away your party members. Mild gameplay spoilers here. They take away your party members and they like flip the gameplay dynamics on its head in a way that game was not built for, and it does not work, and it goes on for hours. Goes on way too long. That game really stumbles near the finish line, and I mean that was just kind of like the final final bummer on what had become a string of bummers at that point. Like I can go into as much or as little detail as you want, but I think pretty much every single aspect of that game, except for like I think its world is neat, and like I think there's some good art in there, and like there's some good music in there, and like I think some of that stuff and like just being in that world is kind of neat, but I think when it comes to actually doing stuff, like between the side quests, the combat, the main quest, I think all of that has substantial problems, and I also think the story does not come together at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think just I'll be a little selfish for a minute. Like I would try to keep it as spoiler free, as possible, because I really have tried to not spoil that game for myself to this point. But I guess my question is, like, you talk about near the end, it takes away your party, and then it makes you play the game in a way that's not really intended. So it sounds like your beef with the game is basically narrative, characters, gameplay, like the whole 9 yards. Is there any redeeming factors for you for this game, or does it just really rank near the bottom for you in a lot of categories?
Yeah, I think every single part of this game has problems. The one thing I like, which I said, was I think the world, like just kind of being in that world, like it's a neat world, and a lot of that just comes from like a audio-visual design of that world. Like I think there's good art in there. I think the world looks neat, and I think there's some good music when you're just kind of out exploring the world. But other than just kind of the look and sound of that open world, like I honestly have a really hard time finding redeeming qualities. Like I think every other aspect of that game has really large problems.
Okay. Nate and Ryan, you guys played Final Fantasy 15, right? Or are in the process of playing it?
Yep, I also finished it.
Okay. So just kind of, pinging the rest of the room. I mean, Ryan, we'll start with you. Sounds like you have a couple of different opinions from what Flex was saying, so why don't you give us your impressions of it real quick?
Yeah, I mean, I think Flex is definitely entitled to his opinion, and that there are a lot of valid complaints against Final Fantasy 15. But overall, I personally liked what they did. I mean, I do feel like, there are a lot of ways in which it could have been better, but overall, partly I was glad to see that they actually released a game, and I personally found that there were a lot of things they did in that game that I liked and that I thought were unique. The setting, I think Flex kind of agrees on that was kind of cool. Personally, I liked the chemistry between the characters, especially your kind of main party. I thought that was the endearing, and that they, although there were some maybe narrative and development issues overall, like they actually developed kind of the personality of those characters and their relationships. And the cinematics, and I thought there were a lot of plot points that were interesting. Sometimes, there was a bit of a weakness in why is this happening or what was going on, but I thought some of the story threads, what Luna was doing, kind of separate from your party, the reason you were doing some of the things you were doing, I thought those were really interesting. And then from a gameplay side, I also thought they did some pretty cool stuff. Like the photography mechanic, I think is unique to any game I've played, and I thought that was super cool, and it fit really well within the context of the game. I like the car audio and MP3 options, where you could kind of at will cycle through this library of amazing music. I enjoyed the active battle system for the most part. I thought it was a little easy, but I liked the magic consumables. I liked warp striking around. I thought it was kind of a neat thing. Not a perfect execution, but overall I enjoyed the story and, definitely parts of the gameplay at least.
Okay. Nate, you want to jump in here and just sort of...
I think I agree with both of you guys on some stuff. I definitely really like the world design and sort of the mythology of that world and a lot of the stuff that goes on in that. I like the presence of the summons as gods and their sort of role. I thought was pretty interesting, and when they show up, it's always kind of a big deal, which was a cool way to handle that.
Yeah, the cinematics on those are amazing too.
Yeah. I think for me the biggest thing about Final Fantasy 15, the narrative parts of that game are interesting in a lot of ways. If you pick it apart and look at it, it's okay, yeah, there's interesting stuff happening here. This is an interesting world, and these characters, some of them at least are interesting. Some of them are definitely not interesting, but that game just messes up the execution of that stuff so badly so often that I found myself just all the time saying why is this happening? What is going on? Why are characters doing the things they're doing?
That was my reaction to the story at almost every turn.
Yeah, it's just so often doesn't make sense to the player, or either that or I'm just stupid. I don't know.
Well, no, I'm actually curious. So the three of you have all played the game and beaten it. Have any of you either watched Kingsglaive or the accompanied anime?
Nope.
I did both. Yeah.
Say that one more time, Ron. You did?
I did both, yeah.
Okay. So I'm not saying that it's right, but I think that the story makes a lot more sense if you look through their other content.
It probably does.
Oh, I'm sure it does, but that doesn't excuse the game itself.
Yeah, I will agree with that. So for one thing, those side content gives you a little more context into the setting, but it also doesn't explain a lot of plot points, like the villains. I think the villains in particular are not well explained.
Yeah.
I also
Empire maybe, but some of the other villains not so much. And it never really gives you the context of the setting. Why is Noctis doing what he's doing?
Right.
The side content, the out of game content helps with that a little bit, but even that doesn't really give you a clear picture on the setting.
Yeah.
So I can definitely agree with some parts of that, but I felt like there were enough good parts that I enjoyed that it didn't.
Yeah, I don't think it's a terrible game taken as a whole. I think there are a lot of things that just baffled me with how they were executed or how they were presented. I still overall mostly enjoyed it. But I definitely had problems, mostly with like 90% of that game not knowing what Noctis's goal was. Like, we were headed somewhere probably to do something. I don't really know.
A lot of it to me kind of felt like they had like set pieces they wanted to do, and they just stitched them together in a way that never made sense.
Yeah. And then there would be random like diversions in the story that like had no relevance to anything else, and you don't know why they're there. It's very strange. I have a big call out on that one. It bounces around a lot. Yeah.
There's one chapter. This is the most ridiculous plot point I've seen in a game in a long time. There is an entire chapter of that game devoted to you. So the Empire are the big bad guys. There's an entire chapter of that game devoted to you getting your car back from the Empire because they stole your car.
Well, that seems like that's awesome.
Think about that for a second. Just think about the idea of this big bad evil scary empire being so petty that they steal your car. And then you're so devoted to that car, you need that specific car back. No other car will do. So you go and invade this Imperial compound that has hundreds of enemy soldiers in it to get a car back. You're a freaking prince. You could go get any car, but you need this one.
But no. I mean, like that car represents safety to Noctis, and he's psychologically attached to that car in a way that he's that I actually can understand that just from playing.
I'll tell you what. I mean, the demo. I will say that they're one of my favorite. And I think I've told you guys this. One of my favorite Luke Cage storylines is when he borrows the Quinjet from the Fantastic Four to fly to get $30 that Dr. Doom owes him because and it's really important that he gets that $30 because he's Luke Cage and he needs it.
So this is exactly what I'm talking about with Final Fantasy. Like if you look at the picture of what is happening in the game at that point, like you go on this, you're on your quest, whatever Noctis is supposed to be doing. During this big epic cinematic fight, the Empire shows up, and I'm trying not to spoil anything that I don't need to here. And they show up, and Noctis and his buddies sort of escape in a very strange way that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but their car gets kidnapped, or carnapped, I guess, by the Empire. And then they're like, we're going to go get our car back, and then that turns into this weird, like, pseudo-stealth mission going into an enemy base. And it's like, okay, I could... So this is sort of what I was
story being told maybe in a way that makes sense.
Right.
But the way they told it didn't make sense.
Right. Like, everything about it is like, okay, if this was done in a more, like, meaningful way, or a way that made more sense to the player, it would be a totally fine sequence. But it just, playing through it the whole time, I was just like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
Like this doesn't make any sense.
Why does the Empire care about this car? Like, imagine Darth Vader stealing Luke Skywalker's X-Wing. Like, imagine him being that petty. And like making a big deal out of it, and then there's like a whole section, like a half-hour section of a movie of Luke just trying to get his X-Wing back, and instead of getting a new X-Wing. It's just bizarre.
Yeah, well, I can say that Frank West has the ability to take really rad selfies in Dead Rising 4, from what I understand. So if you guys didn't get enough selfie taking, you may be able to get some sweet zombie selfie shots in Dead Rising 4.
Okay, cool.
Well, the only thing I want to say on Final Fantasy 15 that we haven't already touched on. So again, like I did enjoy what they were doing, and I agree with the criticisms and the narrative, especially in some of the gameplay. But it makes me optimistic, that maybe Square Enix is kind of like, because the things they did in that game, did well in that game, I kind of enjoyed. So I could see whether it's a Final Fantasy 16 or a 15 to them potentially like taking some of the things that they did well in that game, maybe not taking 10 years to develop the next one, like putting some polish, like making the combat system a little bit more tuned and challenging, making the narrative a little bit more cohesive, and like coming out with a really strong game, even if they use the same or similar set of mechanics.
Yeah, just to sort of wrap up the Final Fantasy 15 talk, it's like, I do think there are some cool things about that. I think it's a pretty unique game, honestly. Like there's a lot in that game that other games don't do.
Right.
So points for that. I think, and to call back to something Ryan said earlier, I do kind of like the 4 main characters on their journey. I just wish that journey felt more purposeful or whatever. I like their sort of skills that they have. I didn't care for fishing as a part of the game, but Noctis likes to fish, and Prompto takes pictures of everything, and you can look through those pictures and see.
And you can also like troll the game very hilariously at the end by picking one of your pictures.
Which I did totally pick a goofy one at the very end, which it made me just giggle through the whole end sequence. But yeah, like I like that stuff, and I like the car trip vibe and all that stuff. It's just the overall wrapper of what the game was doing narratively just never clicked for me. But I think there is cool stuff, and that game is unique in an interesting way.
Yeah, and I think the one other thing I'd like to call out is, like, we've talked a lot about like narrative weirdness, but I think the combat also has its own share of weirdnesses. Like I struggled with, do I like or not like this combat, and ultimately settled more on the negative side, because like a lot of it just feels like a mess in the way that, like, I felt like feedback was really tricky of like telling what was going on and like getting feedback about what you were hitting and what was hitting you, and then like trying to queue up like the whatever they were called on like the L1 special moves where you told people to do something. Like sometimes you'd call those and they would just totally whiff those canned animations, and like not being able to control your allies directly. Like it made it all feel like a big like clunky mess that was just hard to coordinate stuff. And then at the same time it was also really easy because, like, for the most part you can just link strike over and over, and then items are also super broken. So like I was under leveled in the back stretch of the game because I didn't do hardly any side stuff, and like you can really just chug potions and get through that game. Like items are very broken. So it's like it's a combination of like a lot of the options they give you just don't feel right. Like there's just not good feedback, and it just feels like a mess to control. But then also like there are some things that you can do that are just really powerful, that are simple to do, and you can really just bank on those. So like that combat was just really a big mess in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'm it's on my list. I'm actually burning through the stuff that I'm playing right now at a pretty good pace. So I'll definitely be looking forward to maybe ATACS episode 8 or 9 is when I'll have that game completed. I definitely look forward to giving my impressions there and seeing how it lines up with the stuff that you guys have been talking about. I want to take a second and shoot over to Mr. Will, who's been a trooper through all this Final Fantasy 15 talk, and ask what you've been doing.
Well, I mean, I find it really interesting to listen to just, when two people have very, very, different takes on games. Flex and I spent a lot of time talking about what it is that appeal to certain people about what they're playing. And so it's interesting to kind of see these range of impressions. I will say the most of my time in the past 2 weeks has been spent playing Deus Ex: Mankind Divided. Which to me has a lot of story issues in some ways, but at the same time, I found the wrapping to be so fun that it really kind of kept me moving. I like the different kind of augments in the game. I like the way that there are multiple ways to get in and out of pretty much everywhere. I like the scroungy nature of the game. I love it when I have an opportunity to, sort of, peek around in a locker room and like get a whole bunch of random bullets and items. And that was one of the things I ended up liking a lot about BioShock. And this game rewards you for being scroungy and for looking for codes and looking for secret paths. And so you're always a bunch of
people's emails.
Yeah. So you're always feeling like you're really, doing the whole spy thing and doing the covert badass thing.
Yeah.
And some of the side missions actually have more interesting sort of content than the kind of main mission. The main mission sort of, in some ways, attempts to sort of tie into this idea. I know that some of the promotional material were saying things like all lives matter, sort of trying to kind of play off of, existing real world tension.
Yeah, and I mean, just as a quick aside, I think that particular ad campaign was a little bit tasteless, but I'm not going to try and tinge our adults talking about video games with politics and stuff, but one of the things that actually kind of put me off of that game was some of that, like the marketing. I was like, really? And then when actually this first review started to hit, I was like, okay, well, this isn't, a game of the year candidate, so I don't feel like I have to go play it. But yeah, that just kind of felt a little bit cruddy to me.
Right. Well, to me, I mean, it's depending on what game I'm talking about, I may not shy away from talking about politics, because to me, there's a part of it that they're attempting to sort of tie into. So I feel like you can't really talk about, I mean, all the games, every game you play takes place in context. It's a product of the times that it comes out in,
Except for Space Farmers.
but it does remind me a little bit of some of people's criticisms of things like BioShock Infinite. If you remember, in BioShock Infinite, there was sort of, I think about 2/3 of the way through the game, you sort of team up with sort of this sort of kind of, I guess, like black movement almost, sort of like almost like an, I don't know, like a resistance, like a black resistance movement. And some people felt that in some ways that was kind of irresponsible for them to sort of almost name drop it without really giving it some sort of, I guess, intelligent thought, like why would you evoke this without actually having something to add? You're just sort of evoking it because it's sort of a cultural touchstone, And so in some ways I felt like Mankind Divided did that with the whole All Lives Matter, is that, it brings that stuff up in the ad campaign, but there's never really any serious emotional weight to those types of ideas in the game. And a lot of the main storyline to me was a little bit silly. It really didn't have a lot of weight. It was hard to really understand why a lot of the people were doing what they were doing. And then a lot of the more interesting threads weren't actually closed by the end of the game. I think a lot of critics had problems with that. They felt like, why should we wait for some DLC? And there are 2 DLC packs, going on. And so that was kind of what I guess I had some of the interesting ideas that I think would be fun to share. One is that, your guy Jensen has an augment that's like it's sort of like a social augment that allows him to pick up on social cues and figure out the temperament and what might be interesting for some of the people that he's talking to. And so there's actually a character that you find who has a similar implant, but he's found a way to amplify it to where he can almost he has like a cult around him of people who have been really devoted to him because his augment has been able to sort of influence what they see him. And actually, when you find him, your own social augment, if you have it installed, reads him as like benevolent and godlike, So it's really interesting to me playing with this idea of what would happen with an augment like that, like one of these augments that allows you to read social cues and to make other people like you. There's also there's a side quest that I won't go into, but it talks a little bit about if you think of a zip file and the way that a zip file works, it breaks everything down into these little pieces, and then you kind of compile those pieces again. If you imagine an AI personality that's happened to, and imagine that part of the zip file has been stored one place and part of it's been stored another place, like one of your kind of jobs in the game is trying to, you come in contact with an AI that has been kind of split apart. And so you actually have to go collect the data to finish the AI. And so the AI that you interact with is sort of half of a personality. And it's really confused about what it is and what it's doing and what its goals are. And so there's some really interesting pieces, some interesting sci-fi pieces, but they aren't typically part of the main campaign.
That sounds interesting because I played through that game and I don't remember that quest and I probably just missed it.
And there's also, I thought the idea of the orchid was interesting. And in the game, anyone who has augments who's not Adam Jensen has to take this really, really pricey drug called neuropozyne so that their body doesn't reject the augments. And so, knowing that, you can really kind of craft a weapon that really messes with the people who have augments. And so it plays with a couple interesting themes, but more than anything, I found myself playing just because the gameplay loop was really interesting to me.
Yeah.
But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. The game is still really fun at its core, the way that the last Deus Ex game was. But I have to agree with your overall assessment that I didn't find the plot points to be that engaging. I was a little disappointed by sort of the overall arc of that game and how it ended, like you said.
Yeah. But that was Deus Ex. The other thing I had kind of written down to talk about is a game that's called Minerva Metastasis, and it's if you search Steam from time to time like I do just to kind of see what some of the highly rated games are, it's one of the games that's actually towards the top on the FPS category. And I was like, what is this? And it turns out that it's a user-made sort of mod. It's a source sort of in sort of the Half-Life 2 kind of universe that someone made, and the mod got such good reception that its creator was later hired by Valve to work on, like, I guess, in that universe, which supposedly he hasn't done anything because that universe hasn't done anything. But it's an interesting kind of game, and I think one of the hallmarks of it is that he really gets loading times down very, very short. I don't know if you guys remember Half-Life 2. You'd have some pretty chuggy loading times when you go from one zone to another, and they were kind of frequent. This particular developer was very good at sort of making the level kind of build vertically and wrap around each other. So he has actually a pretty detailed theory of what he believes good game design or good map design is in a first-person shooter. And so you see that when you play the game. You may see an area in one part of the game, and then an hour later you actually be in that area. And there's so much space that's used in first-person shooters just to sort of paint the scene or just something you look out the window and see. And so this particular developer was like, I don't think that's particularly economical, and I don't think that maybe it's as effective or as efficient as it could be, because, why would we develop that space if we're not going to use it? And so in some ways it's sort of kind of a feat of map design. So it was interesting playing it from that kind of academic perspective. And it was pretty fun, and it's free. So that was kind of neat. It was about... Go ahead.
Does it play a lot like Half-Life does, I assume?
It does.
Okay.
And you have pretty much all the same weapons and pretty much the same enemies. It's just sort of kind of a standalone little tale in the Half-Life universe. And it's about, I think it's something like 2 hours long. But either way, it was an interesting thing to kind of look at.
Yeah, that is interesting because I wasn't really a big fan of Half-Life 2, and I actually did think, like a lot of shooters do, it did have a lot of that wasted space. So that's interesting to hear that the person who made this mod was like, that was a conscious thing they thought about, is like, oh, how can we like design this space in a way that's like like more economical and like less wasteful.
And you can tell in the game. I mean, the load times are much shorter than they were in your Half-Life 2, although the engine is the same. And the only other thing I thought would be fun to talk about is, I was curious if you guys got my email about the Steam game Moirai.
Yeah, I got it, and I'm sorry to say that I did not get a chance to play that before our recording. So
Okay. Did
I'm
anyone
sorry.
get a chance to play it?
Yeah, I played it.
Okay, did you get it, Nate?
He's not here at the moment.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, so out of curiosity, what were your guys' thoughts? What'd you think, Ryan?
It was kind of neat. Like so I mean, the initial setup reminded me of like some like 1990s like sprite-based first-person game, like old school dungeon crawler, I'm thinking like maybe like Might and Magic or maybe even older. So I kind of like that setting. The little story catch they had was kind of clever. I mean, it was a super short game. So
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't much there. It wasn't like a deep thing, but it did like a little clever loop thing.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to a little bit, and I guess I'll spoil it for you, Paul, and just
go ahead.
Because it really is super short.
Did you play Moirai, Nate?
I did not. I did not have a chance to.
So the twist is basically that a woman is missing. You're tasked with finding her. As you go into the cave, you meet a man who is also on the way to find her. He's like, you need a knife because there could be some dangerous stuff in this cave. We don't know what happened to this girl. And you're given a knife and you go into the cave.
And a lantern.
Yeah, and a lantern. And you go into the cave, and as you're coming in the cave, there's a man who's coming out, and he's got a knife and he's covered with blood. And he asks you, or basically you ask him some questions. You ask him, what are you doing down here? Why do you have this knife? I can't remember the third question.
Why are you covered in blood?
Yeah, and why are you covered in blood? And you can choose to either, deal with him or not. I mean, you can try and kill him or not. And you go on, and no matter what happens, you keep going back into the cave, and you find Julia, who has actually gone to the cave to try and kill herself because she's depressed. And I can't remember. I think her family has been killed or something.
Yeah, she has lost her husband and son.
Right. So she's
they
very,
had found
very
some
upset.
gold or something like that. Her husband. So I guess to expound upon this plot, so apparently her husband had found gold that would make their family wealthy, but he I don't know, he became jealous or something, so he hid it from her.
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, he had some reservations about taking the gold, so yeah, he hid it somewhere.
And he left. And you actually, I think, find the gold in the cave, but you can't reach it.
Yeah.
Well,
you can find where it is, but yeah, you can't get to it.
So these guys went harder on the gameplay than I did, Paul.
So I think her husband leaves her, and then her son wants to find her husband, so he goes into the cave and dies.
Yeah.
So she's all alone, and she can't find the gold, and the village thinks she's wealthy, but she's not. So she's keeping up appearances.
Either way, she tries to kill herself, and she wants you to help her finish the job. I don't know what happens if you try and help her, but I didn't. But when I didn't help her, she got annoyed at me, and she was already pretty wounded because she had tried to kill herself but didn't quite finish the job. And so she spits on you, and of course she's covered in blood, and she's got blood in her mouth, and so you get covered in blood.
Yeah.
And then you head out, because I said I'm going to go get you some help. And on your way in, Paul, who would have guessed it? But there's another person coming in. And so
who would have guessed? And
so the game ends after you type in your responses to the 3 questions that you asked the man coming out when he comes. And so later on, the next person who plays the game, they go ahead and play the game, and then they choose whether to kill you, and the game emails you your response. So whether or not you were killed. Yes.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty neat.
Right? You should have played it. Anyway.
I should have. You're right. I'm sorry, Will. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. But I just think it's an interesting thing because you can, of course, be pretty gamey with your answers. Flex found a way to kind of word his answers where he felt that it was pretty fail-safe. But actually, my friend Tim, who I haven't talked about on the podcast, played the game, and he also thought that his answers were pretty good, but then he got an email that said he had been killed. So apparently his answers weren't good enough to dissuade.
Or it could just be a player who's just going to kill regardless.
It could be, but
it is really suspicious because you come up on this cave and there's a dude with a knife and a lantern covered in blood.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's a woman missing. Why are you covered in blood?
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, killing him on this, there's not nearly enough evidence unless the player entered answers just saying kill me or something like that. There's also not enough evidence to kill them. So it's interesting in that they they give you little inklings of like, oh yes, he has a knife and is covered in blood, but like making that step to then killing this person, like that's a huge leap to make that they actually did something wrong. So like it's interesting that they try and give you like just barely enough to go that route, but maybe not enough. And it also, of course, depends on the answers they give as well.
Yeah, and Flex is assuming that due process exists in Moirai.
Well, and I mean, it also depends on the kind of answers too, because the guy I ran into said, like when I asked like, why are you, or what did you do? He said nothing wrong, but I am ashamed. And he's like, I helped her, or I gave her what she wanted. So like, yeah, it was really, it was an honest answer, I think, but it was like, yes, I helped kill her.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's an interesting social experiment of a game.
Yeah, that does seem interesting. So did you guys say, of you three that played it, did you all kill the man coming out of the...
I didn't. I did not kill him.
Okay.
I didn't kill him, and I was not killed.
So none of you...
I didn't kill him, I didn't kill Julia, and I was not killed.
Okay.
No killing.
No death.
It was a full stealth run, no killing.
Yeah, no death run.
It was a Moirai non-lethal playthrough.
That's great.
Right, but anyway, that's all I really had to talk about in terms of games.
All right. So let's see. Man, lots of talking. Ryan, what you been doing?
I just have a couple things. So the first off is that yesterday I had the chance to go to Distant Worlds, which is a Final Fantasy orchestration.
That is not a video game. We have officially branched into cool stuff that isn't specifically video games.
But it's very much video game related.
Yeah.
Sure.
So yeah, it was pretty sweet though. Nobuo Uematsu was in attendance.
He was really
a couple times.
Huh. I wonder. I mean, because Distant Worlds has been around for
a long time.
Yeah, a long time.
This was their 10-year anniversary.
Okay. I wonder I wonder if he was there just for that, like being an anniversary. But what I was going to ask is, I wonder if he's with them regularly or if this was a special occasion. But sounds like maybe a special occasion.
Yeah, I don't think he's there all the time. It probably depends on the venue as well. Like the New Jersey venue is going to be pretty big. And yeah, it's their 10-year anniversary and Final Fantasy's 30-year anniversary. So he wasn't directing, but he was in attendance, came on the stage. They had some quips. There was also an attendee from Square Enix. Celebrity dumb aside, it was a cool concert though. They opened up with the Crystal theme, and they showed footage from Final Fantasies 1 through 14. And that was actually... The intro and outro were probably the strongest parts of that concert. They did play a lot of good music, though. They played some themes from 12, from 9, from 14. Had the original vocalist for some of the 14 themes, and that she sang Answers, which was pretty cool. They did Cosmo Canyon, which I think was either their North America or their overall premiere. They did a Final Fantasy VI medley of character themes, which they did Terra and Kefka, which were pretty awesome.
All right.
And
Doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, my favorite parts, the strongest parts were definitely that intro, that Crystal theme. I think some of the original, they did, I think, like, aside from the Crystal theme, I think they did, like, the main theme from Final Fantasy 1.
Did they do Matoya's Cave?
Don't think they did Matoya's Cave. They didn't do anything from Final Fantasy 3 either, which I was disappointed in. Slightly disappointed. I like 3 music.
It's interesting to hear him lean so much into 14, because Theatrhythm also had a lot of Final Fantasy 14 music, and I wonder if they've been really trying to push that in recent years.
I think some of it is probably that they want to, drum up support for more recent games. They did do a 15 theme. I think it was one of their first performances of Apocalyptus Noctis, which was kind of neat. But then the outro was also really good. They did a huge battle medley of battle themes from 1 through 14.
Oh, that's great.
And
sounds great.
That was pretty sweet. And they did... the audience called for an encore, so they brought... they they brought everybody back, and they did One Winged Angel, and they had the audience sing the Sephiroth part.
I was gonna joke when you first started talking about Distant Worlds, did they have an encore with One Winged Angel? Because I feel like that always happens.
Yeah, I got.
I mean, it's still cool, but it's like the thing.
Yeah, that was pretty well something they had planned, but it was still, having it been my first time and not hearing anything about it, and it was one of their better performances too. Like some of the stuff in the middle, like even the themes which I liked, not that they played it badly or anything, it just didn't always strike me, but the intro and outro were pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So that was a ton of fun. Yeah, I definitely.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Doing a Distance Worlds if you get the chance.
Yeah, that's something I would always like to do if given the opportunity. That series just has great music.
Yeah. Aside from that, the only other new thing I've been playing, aside from some Titanfall and odds and ends, is I've been working on Alpha Protocol, which I think I mentioned last time.
Yeah, I thought that was a typo.
Say what?
I mean, Alpha Protocol, that game came out 2012 or something?
2010.
2010? Okay, it's even older than I thought, and it's bad. So, explain to me why you're playing Alpha Protocol.
So bad, I think, is interesting.
Well, no, I've never played it. Full disclosure, I just remember thinking about playing it, but then going, and I guess at the time it would have been Metacritic or Game Rankings, one of the two, and it didn't have good reviews there. So, what's made you go back to it in 2017?
Well, so this year is a bit of a, my goal for this year kind of is to do a little backlog cleaning and maybe hold off on some new games while I'm working on my backlog. And Alpha Protocol is a game, I think I got it for $3 or $4, but it always kind of had piqued my interest because of some of the things they said they did with Reputation and stuff.
Yeah, it's got a little following. There's some people who are really devoted to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that part of the game is good. I mean, it's an Obsidian game, so they give you some choices and some, they have pretty good writing. The setting is pretty interesting. You're basically a super spy in a sort of modern, terrorist / American corruption / all sorts of Russian, Chinese, et cetera, et cetera. Writing is pretty good. Gameplay is kind of a light, stealthy thing, not super challenging on normal mode. So it's pretty forgiving. It's been fun so far. I mean, it's probably a little long in the tooth, and of course, it's definitely has some polish issues, and the gameplay is pretty straightforward and bland. I think those are all kind of common Obsidian themes, but it's got an interesting story. So we'll see how much farther it goes and how I feel about it at the end, but I think it's been kind of a fun little romp.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm actually kind of curious whenever you get to the end of that, because Alpha Protocol is one of those games where I looked at it and I thought, hey, this could be good, and then I went, never mind. So if you do end up having an overall positive impression at the end, maybe I'll go back and revisit some of that. But yeah. Nate, so other than Final Fantasy 15, what you been having going on?
Yeah, so I've got a pretty good amount of things I can talk about, but I think they'll all be pretty quick since we got Final Fantasy 15 out of the way.
All right.
First off, yesterday, after having finished Final Fantasy 15, I decided, I really like Final Fantasy, and they started getting bad around 10, so I would take the 10 out of 15 and go back to Final Fantasy 5.
Excellent.
So
I'm following this logic.
Solid logic there.
Yes,
I like it.
I just started Final Fantasy 5. I have not played enough of it to say anything about it, but that's the last of the main numbered games that I have not played all the way through. So
Final Fantasy 5 to me was the one Final Fantasy that no one played that I think you could make an argument that it is definitely one of the top of the of really any of the Final Fantasies. So, and there's a couple of scenes in 5 which are really, really good. So I'm glad that you're playing that.
We'll have to make those arguments in a future podcast.
Yeah, that's going to come up at some point.
Watching Distant Worlds though was kind of inspiring. I don't think I'll have time anytime soon, but it definitely gave me a bit of an itch to go play some Final Fantasy.
Yeah. No one played 5, but it's really good.
5 is really good.
It's really good.
So I'll have more to say about that next time.
All right.
Other quick one to get out of the way, I played some Flywrench, which we've talked about on here a little bit. That game also is really cool. Fast, really fast, simplistic, action-y. I guess you could almost call it a platformer, but
Sure.
I mean, that's probably the closest thing I can think of as far as genre goes. But yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's one of those games that like you just play it and it feels good.
Yeah, it just controls really well. Everything's very clear and deliberate and fast paced, and it makes you feel good when you finally finish that level that you tried 50 times.
Yeah, it's not an easy game. It's got a real ramp to it. It goes places.
Yeah. Oh wait, just so I'm clear, Flywrench. What platforms did that come out on?
PC.
Yeah. Was it? Okay. All right.
I think it's just PC.
As far as I know, yeah. It's a steamer.
Xbox Live Arcade 360. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's by the people who did Nidhogg. It's that team.
Right.
Oh. Okay. All right.
A couple of other things. I did buy a new tabletop RPG rulebook, which I enjoy reading from time to time, even when I don't get around to playing them. So I have a new one called The Sprawl, which is a cyberpunk-themed tabletop RPG based on the Apocalypse World engine. Apocalypse World is a game that came out a little while ago, and there have been a whole bunch of different takes on that in different styles and genres.
Is that a D20 system, or is it more like a D10 system like Cthulhu?
It is neither. So the Apocalypse, powered by the Apocalypse, I think is the official name of the engine, sort of like the D20 system.
Sounds terrifying.
So instead of a D20, the core of the system is 2D6.
Okay.
And so that creates sort of a normal curve of results. Right. And one of the sort of front interesting things about the system is that results are the difficulty level for all tasks are essentially the same, and the results are split into 3 possible categories. So on your 2d6 plus whatever your modifiers are, if you get 6 or lower, it's a failure. 7 to 9, it's a partial success or success with a cost, and if you get a 10 or higher, it's a complete success.
Okay.
So there's a lot of interesting stuff in that system. I'd like to give it a whirl at some point. But yeah, that's something I spent some time on reading.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, I've heard tons of good things about that game. I don't know a lot about it myself, but that seems to be like among tabletop RPGs, like that one has. I've even noticed that's gotten way more buzz than most over the past few years.
Yeah. And Cyberpunk is a cool aesthetic too. With
definitely.
Possibilities.
I can agree with that.
Yeah.
So other than that, the only other game I want to talk about is Event Zero, which is a kind of cool game. I don't know if any of you have heard of or played that.
I have heard of it. I have not played
it, but haven't yet. Yeah.
Is it?
It is.
Name sounds cool.
Yeah, it is sort of a sci-fi adventure game. Very short. It's 2 or 3 hours to play through, and sort of the game is a pretty standard sci-fi trope. You're stuck on a space station with an AI, and
this is where you have to like talk to it, right?
Yeah, so it's all actual text that you type in using the keyboard. So you're basically wandering the space station, and there are computer terminals everywhere that you can communicate with the AI through, and you just walk up to them, start typing, and it'll respond with usually fairly decent responses based on what you said, and you try to work with this AI, and it's sort of some mystery elements and a lot of wondering if this AI is out to kill you or not. It's kind of shady, trying to figure out a way to get home, basically. But it's interesting.
How well do you feel the AI works?
That
feels like what this entire game hinges on.
It is, and I think 90% of the time it worked really well. There are definitely the times where you say
Okay.
something and it gives you the like, I don't have anything to say about that.
Okay.
You know?
Does it ever?
And what you?
I think we're having technical issues here.
Oh, okay.
All right,
Uh-oh.
you're back.
Okay.
We missed the last thing you said.
Okay. So yeah, sometimes it'll just say when you ask it something or tell it to do something, it'll say, "Oh, I don't have anything to say about that," or whatever its generic response is. So
Right.
sometimes you can see the seams a little bit, but for the
Yeah.
most part, it works, and it's really like weird when you start arguing with this AI about what you
That's
need it
great.
to do.
Yeah. Do you ever get? This is another thing I'm really curious about. Do you ever get any left field Cleverbot style responses from it?
No, I don't think I did.
Okay.
Nothing really crazy. Like
Okay.
sometimes it's very weird. Like, but I think it's part of the AI's personality. It's like it's almost a little deranged, and
Okay.
so
That's a good way to play into that. Sure.
yeah, and so like you're trying to figure out about the people who were on the space station before you got here and what happened, and it'll kind of play coy a little bit. And
Right.
so
Okay.
it's interesting trying to sort of piece everything together, but you're still trying to work with this AI because it has complete control over the station,
Right.
and trying to make it think that you're on its side and that you'll do what it wants in the end, because it kind of all culminates in a decision that you have to make, and how the AI responds to you sort of depends on how you've acted towards it the whole game. It has a lot of cool stuff. It's worth checking out for just a few hours.
Okay.
Slight tangent on that, a non-video game cool stuff thing. But that reminds me, I've been listening to a podcast called Sayer, which has a little bit of that, like, it's just a podcast, so it's all one-sided, but it has a little bit of that, like, GLaDOS, you're on this corporation and this AI is saying all these kind of like funny but also very dark things.
Sure.
So I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm kind of curious if there's any overlap.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty common
Probably.
trope with
And
the murderous AI.
or
Yeah.
how similar or different. I mean, yeah, GLaDOS is kind of a big example of that from the Portal series. So
Sure.
Yeah, and then also System Shock 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, System Shock 2. I mean, there's been a bunch of the murderous AIs, which
Yeah.
I mean, even Mass Effect had some of that.
Yeah, and
So-
Event Zero's AI is not like, the second you meet it, you're like, oh, this is an evil AI that wants to murder everything. Like,
Sure.
It definitely has like some positive characteristics, and if you don't vilify it, it will be nice to you, and things like that.
Right. All right. Well, I mean I've heard a lot of good things about Event Zero. I would like to say it's on my list, but my list is too long. For much like what Ryan is doing for this year, I've been working through my backlog for 6 straight years, and I still haven't quite gotten there yet. So yeah,
Pro tip: you'll never get there.
I'm never gonna get there. You're totally right.
None of us
Especially
will.
when I keep loading up Stardew Valley and starting new farms. I really need to get away from that. Because I didn't write down Stardew Valley, but guess what I've been playing for the last couple of weeks? It's been Stardew Valley. So, anyway, so we're going to take, unless anyone else has anything to say, I think it's time for a break before we get to the news. Is everyone good with that? All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about the news. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We're back. It's back. ATACS, episode 6. Just got done talking about video games and other stuff. Now we're going to talk about some other cool stuff and move into the news. So to lead off on our news segment, we have some Q&A from Jason Schreier of Kotaku for Nintendo regarding the Switch. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but there's a few things a few answers and also a few non-answers regarding the Switch that we kind of wanted to talk about here. And there's really two things that sort of I want to kick off with to the panel, and then we'll just kind of see where this conversation goes. The Nintendo had nothing to say about being compatible with existing virtual console purchases. The Switch being compatible with existing virtual console purchases, and they also had nothing to say about the Switch connecting to existing Wii U and 3DS accounts. So no, in this case, I think a no answer is a bad answer because Nintendo's not done a great job with its with its online services. But I just kind of feel like, at least for these two things, these two questions, the Wii U and the 3DS, its most recent home and handheld console respectively, having nothing to announce about those consoles being able to migrate their accounts over to the Switch is a bit disturbing, and also having nothing to announce about your existing virtual console purchases moving over to the Switch, that is also a bit disturbing. And I can't really say that I'm a fan of those answers, but at the same time, 2017 is the year of relentless positivity. So is there any positivity out there on the panel for the answers to these questions or the non-answers to these questions?
I mean, I don't think you can take those non-answers as anything other than that's not what they're looking at right now, unless they're really holding off on those announcements.
Yeah. The only way that these non-answers are not negative answers is if they're still. I could see a situation where they're still scrambling on the engineering side of this, and they're not sure yet if they can do it. But I think it's more likely that they're just not going to do it, and they don't want to say that yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no positivity at all.
Yeah.
Not about those specific ones you already called out. It's also I think whenever you go into a new Nintendo system, you expect this stuff because this is how it's always been for them. Like, if you bought 100 virtual console games on the Wii, when the Wii U came out, none of that transferred over. So it's just like the continuing bummer of the way the virtual console and Nintendo accounts work. So these non-answers are hinting at the status quo, which is not a positive.
Yeah. So just a quick ping of the panel. Has anyone here actually pre-ordered the Switch?
Maybe.
Okay. So we got a maybe.
I think just
yes,
the one.
I have.
Okay. All right. So there's one Switch pre-order. Does anyone feel that they're going to probably have the Switch by this upcoming holiday season? Holiday 2017. Is anyone planning on buying it?
Yeah.
There's a good chance for me.
Okay.
I'm sure I'll get one. I'll probably get one soon after launch. I just didn't rush out and pre-order them, and then they were all gone, and I was like, okay, well, I didn't really need a pre-order anyway.
Yeah, they went really fast.
Okay.
But I'll probably get one when they are available, and I happen to be at a place that has them.
Okay. All right, I was just curious. I mean, there's nothing behind that question. I just was kind of gauging where everyone was. So as far as the actual Q&A that Kotaku put Nintendo through, a lot of it doesn't. I mean, a lot of it's standard stuff. 32 gigs of storage is hilariously small in any console or any computing system nowadays. My phone has more storage than that. But
most AAA games on non-Nintendo platforms are bigger than 32 gigs.
Yeah, so that's why I say it's hilariously small. But the SDXC standard goes up to 2 terabytes. It's nowhere near there are not 2 terabyte cards on the market right now. But
which it is hilarious that they bother to point that out.
Yeah,
answer.
Yeah, and that's something else to where it's like Nintendo stop, because you would think that they would at least support external USB hard drives, which both the PS3 and the Xbox 360 I believe both of them supported external USB hard drives by the end of their lifespan through software updates. And Nintendo is not saying that it's supported out of the gate.
Yeah, I don't think it was in this interview, but they have said somewhere that they're looking into supporting that. So I could see that coming down the road in some kind of firmware update. But yeah, it is a bummer to not have it out of the gate.
Right, and I just feel like that if the 360 and the PS3 had it by the end of their console life cycles, then the Switch.
I think the Wii U did too.
I'm pretty sure it did. The fact that the Switch does not launch with external USB hard drive support is just a bummer.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of things about this system, and including in this Q&A, that make me think this system may be coming in a little hot, and they just haven't worked out some of that stuff yet. And I think maybe they're kind of hedging their bets and just saying, hey, look, the super non-critical things like external hard drive, maybe we'll just cut them out for now and get the system out to market. Like, one of these questions asks about stuff like YouTube and Hulu and Amazon Video. Like, that stuff is apparently not going to work out of the box, and that's insane because systems have been doing that for a decade, and I can't imagine that would be a hard deal for them to work out.
Yeah,
but
and that's where
I
also
also think that would come in later, and it kind of makes me feel like they just haven't got all these ducks lined up yet, and some of these more peripheral things are just not going to be ready at launch, and that stuff's just coming in hot.
Well, and I don't want to rehash the discussion we had about the Switch beforehand, but it kind of strikes me if it's coming in hot with, we talked a little bit about how, if the rumors are correct, this is based on the NVIDIA Shield tablet technology, which has been out since mid-2014. And in terms of hardware and software firepower, it's coming in at a pretty underwhelming low bar, even for a tablet market. So the fact that it's also coming in, quote unquote hot with a bunch of unanswered questions and unsupported software is just, still a good chance I'll get one. It'll still probably be a fun system at not a super high price point, but man, it definitely feels like they set the bar pretty low on what they could have accomplished with this system.
Right.
So there is. Oh, go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think I agree that it seems like it's coming in a little hot, especially on the software side and the I guess networking infrastructure stuff, whatever their network solution is going to be.
Yeah. Smoke signals.
So I think it's interesting. I think part of, and I wasn't here last time when you guys talked about it, so sorry if I retread some ground here, but the Switch to me seems like they are doing a couple of things. They're launching it in March, first of all, which is not typically when consoles launch.
Right. It's not that far away either.
Yeah, the 3DS did, but that's one of the only ones I can think of.
Yeah, and they seem to not have a lot of their software and network stuff lined up for the launch of the system. It's kind of coming out alongside Zelda, and they're sort of going to be using Zelda to try and sell these things, presumably. I think the things that it has going for it is that it's Nintendo, and there's a certain fan base that's going to get on board for a Nintendo system no matter what it is, and that they have this sort of potential promise that they aren't fully promising on yet, but they will soon, I'm sure, of it being the one place to get Nintendo games for all of their future development of titles, even though they're still saying they're supporting the 3DS. I don't know that anybody actually believes them on that. So
I guess the new Fire Emblem game is coming out.
There is another Fire Emblem game coming out for 3DS. There will probably be 3DS games throughout 2017 and probably a couple more in 2018. But you can't imagine it really going much further than that.
Yeah, the thing I said about that last time was I would assume there will be no newly developed games for the 3DS, but anything that's currently in development or anything that's a multi-platform could still come out to 3DS. They'll support it into the Switch's life cycle the same way the PS3 was supported into the PS4's life cycle, just like any crossover game that multi-platform game that makes sense or anything that was already in development.
Yeah. So to me it feels like the Switch is, they got the hardware that they wanted in terms of it being a tablet and a dock and the Joy-Con and all that. And they're putting it out in early part of the year when it will still sell out because there are enough Nintendo fans to sell out then.
Yeah.
And then they'll keep adding the software functionality throughout this year and have it ready for quote-unquote prime time for holiday and make another big push then. That's sort of the feeling I get from what they're saying about the system so far.
Yeah, and like I just kind of want to just jump in. Like I don't think anyone's trying to put the system in the grave,
Yeah.
It's just if you're gonna buy a Switch, wait for it. I mean, I think that's probably like one of those things to where yes, there's still plenty of time for Nintendo to come out and say, hey, look, here's Netflix and here's Hulu. And by the way, we're going to make it to where you can port over your old VC games. I mean, there's still plenty of stuff out there that they can do and say, which is totally fine. But the fact that there are so many unanswered questions and we are so close to launch relatively is like that to me is the thing that gives me the most pause, because honestly the Switch is the first Nintendo console in a long time to come out to make me think, I really like the idea behind this, but they have not done anything to flesh it out in a way that gives me the warm and fuzzies.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that they can't do that, but they need to prove it to me first.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that I feel confident that they will deliver on all those things. I think a lot of those probably will end up being disappointing long run. But I do think it's an interesting situation they're in. I think they're launching the hardware because the hardware is ready, even if everything else isn't. And I mean, the launch lineup of games shows that too. Like,
yeah,
sure.
The one, the to me actually the most interesting question or answer they gave in this Q&A is about the region-free stuff.
Yeah.
They basically said, because they said in the presentation that it was going to be a region-free console, but they also basically said that, hey, you can have multiple accounts per system, and we're not going to stop you from making one of those accounts a Japanese account if you want, and then just buy stuff digitally from the Japanese store. So,
but none of that's going to work.
Well, yeah, but assuming it works, it sounds like they're basically just giving you full reign to like just go and buy digital stuff from any store regardless of region, which I think is really cool. So like that is the one positive from this. So like if they ever get around to making Undin 3 and it doesn't come out in the US, like in theory I can go download that from the store online and it'll work.
Yeah,
that's true.
So I think that is a good thing that that did come out of this.
That is one of their EDF games when they're still in Japan.
Yeah, so when EDF comes out and it's going to take a few months or years to get to the US, you can just go get it digitally from the Japan store.
That's true. That is one of their former, design decisions / foibles that does seem like they're taking a positive step on.
Yeah.
I hope they have a direct in the month of February where they show some of the operating system and network stuff that they're going to have at launch and some of their plans for it, but I'm not confident that they will.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the things that we all have to just sort of like, don't worry too much, but at the same time don't also think that they're going to figure all this stuff out. I really feel like that they still have time, because to me, they're going to release the console in March, right? Well, the only thing that's coming out with the console is, Breath of the Wild. In terms of like, this is a really big game that is going to be really good, and if you're a fan of gaming, you probably want to play that game,
Dude, Just Dance 2017, come on.
Anyway, so... the next thing that's going to come out for that system that to me seems like a system seller kind of game is the next Mario, which is slated for holiday of this year. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say, especially if you already have a Wii U. Get Breath of the Wild for the Wii U if you're super excited about that game, and then just see what happens over the course of the next 6 or 7 months with the Switch and with how they support it and what changes. Like, I think that's a totally reasonable thing to do. And, maybe if you don't have a Wii U, or maybe that you're going to enjoy, the entire life cycle of the system because Nintendo's never let you down over the life cycle, sure, go ahead and buy one. But I don't think that you can really make a good argument for why, someone should just go out and purchase this system over another one until we see where this goes and until another couple of games comes out, which to me says holiday of this year is when you're really going to make the decision of whether or not you ever want to own a Switch.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of Switch info out there. There's going to be more coming. It's certainly not the end of.
I feel like the first 3 months of this year are just nonstop Switch news trickle.
And even after the system comes out, I think we're still going to be talking about it off and on. But we're going to go ahead and move into the next item here on the news, which is Banner Saga 3 has a Kickstarter up right now. As of the time, great. As of the time of this recording, on January 29th, they are almost at their goal. They're at $188,000, basically, of $200,000, and they have 37 days to go. Safe to say, Banner Saga 3 will be funded.
Yep, seems likely.
That's a good thing.
I think within 2 days they were at like $150,000. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Right.
Most of the funding generally happens in the first 2 or 3 days, and then the back 2 or 3 days.
And as someone that didn't play either Banner Saga 1 or 2, I'm going to let you guys talk about this for a little bit.
This one's, obviously there are tons of Kickstarter and crowdfunding things. This one's interesting because they kickstarted the first game, and it went really well for them. Like, they blew past their goal. So then when they were making the second one, they decided not to kickstart it because they thought they had gotten so much money and they were in a good enough financial spot, and they had enough to make that second game and also to market it. But the sales of the second game were so much lower than the first game, and there's a really interesting interview that came along with this Kickstarter initiative that they basically said, like, Kickstarter is not just a way to fund your game, but it's also a way to get people invested in your game. And they more or less said they felt like running a Kickstarter led to more sales of the game. Like, so basically, point being, like, crowdfunding is not just funding. It also creates, like, a level of awareness and attachment to the game that results in more sales than you would get otherwise. So it's not purely a funding thing, which is really interesting. So they basically said, like, yeah, we do need money because Banner Saga 2 didn't sell as well as we wanted, but at the same time, like, doing a Kickstarter just generates more awareness and will probably lead to more sales, so it's worth doing anyway. So I thought that was a really interesting interview on why they returned to Kickstarter. So they saw the success in the first one, not as much in the second one, and then they're coming back. Like, it's kind of an interesting perspective on what crowdfunding does for games.
It is a curious story. And I think that makes sense because crowdfunding is not so far removed from early access, which, I think we've seen has been sort of a growing business model in the past 5 or so years.
Yeah,
it's an interesting thing that's happened with crowdfunding over the years. The other interesting part of the interview is they said the first game was crowdfunded in 2012, which apparently was a hotbed time for crowdfunding, and projects just don't get that much anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be, obviously they're going to hit their goal. And I haven't gone through and read this. Is Banner Saga 3 going to be the last Banner Saga, or have they really said?
Yes, it's supposed to conclude the trilogy.
Okay.
Whether there are more after that, I don't know, but this is supposed to conclude this story arc.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm curious to see what this ends up looking like after it comes out, and seeing how it stacks up to the first two. I bet it's going to be very similar to the first two.
Probably.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm invested in that story, so I want to see it through. But
yeah, I definitely want to see the ending. That.
Sure. Will, do you want to talk about this For Honor beta thingamajigger?
Yeah. I have. I have some friends, suffice it to say, that are very invested in competitive multiplayer games. And as such, they take a particular, I guess, interest in anything that's kind of doing something substantially different than the juggernauts of the day, which are typically, your big first-person shooters. And so For Honor is an Ubisoft game that is coming out, and Ubisoft has sort of it's a hand-to-hand medieval combat competitive multiplayer game. And Ubisoft has said semi-recently that they were going to use P2P servers, which especially for console shooters, that's not really all that weird, But I think because it is hand-to-hand combat, I think it's going to be a little bit more tricky for them to really do this well. And I think it's going to be much more visible if there is any kind of lag or compensation or whatever, And I remember like I was telling, the last time I saw a game try and do this was Anarchy Reigns, which just, there was a little bit of lag in that, and it kind of ended up being kind of a clusterfuck, a mess. So I'm kind of curious. I've read a couple of impressions from people who have played this beta, and there's now a beta out for this game. And there is some legitimate concerns about, whether there's lag or whether or not your swords are hitting when they're supposed to. And so in some ways I feel like I've always kind of been in this camp where I feel like more developers who are interested in competitive shooters should do dedicated servers. A lot of the games that have blown up, I know Rocket League uses dedicated servers. I feel like if you want your game to have a consistent, dedicated group of players, then you need to invest in it that way. I don't know where anybody else stands on that particular argument, but I guess it just disappoints me that they're not, going in that direction.
Right. I mean, and I think that dedicated servers for multiplayer games, like, I'm not going to say is a requirement, but it pretty much should be. I mean, there's been a lot of multiplayer games that have come out that have tried to sort of, I don't know how you want to say it, reduce costs
Right.
or be cheap is, I guess, the
cut corners, maybe.
Cut corners, yeah. And
democratize.
No, that's not the word, Ryan. You have the wrong words, and that's one of the...
Isn't that what P2P is?
Yes, but no. But yeah,
trying to be positive here, okay?
Yep.
You are trying to be positive, and thank you very much for that. We certainly need that in 2017. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I can certainly understand P2P servers in multiplayer games that somehow don't require sort of the snapshot reaction timing, right? I mean, purely co-op games is a good example, but especially hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah,
that's a little more than just guns. And so,
yeah, and especially this game in particular, because like all the footage and impressions I've seen about this game is like it's very based on attacking and countering with the right thing based on what your opponent's doing, and a lot of times that seems to happen in very very quick instant reactions. So like I imagine the timing windows for a lot of things in that game are very tight. So
yeah,
they're really going to need that stuff to be on point. Did they say, I'm sorry, did they say for sure that the final game is going to be P2P, or was it just the beta that was P2P?
Let's see here.
Because I wonder, the two things I wonder, one is, I wonder if they're trying it out with the beta just to see how it works.
Leaked footage from this week's closed alpha test of For Honor, Ubisoft's most-promoted medieval combat game reveals that it will not use dedicated service for its online multiplayer and instead rely on peer-to-peer networking. And then people ask them about lag, and they say no player will have an advantage in a match compared to others. So I don't know if that means it's going to be equally laggy.
Equally laggy for both.
It's bad for everyone. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I wonder if they would be able to or willing to see results from the beta and then switch it to dedicated servers. I don't know if that's in their thought process at all. The other thing I wonder is like, I have no idea how much this stuff costs, but I wonder if there could be just some harsh business reality of like the numbers on the level of interest in For Honor maybe just don't look good, and maybe they just don't feel they can plop down the support for dedicated servers.
Right. I don't know.
I have no idea. That's just pure speculation. I mean, I could see that being a case where there's just not a lot of interest for that game.
Yeah, I would assume that has something to do with it at least. And even like, this all came out of leaked footage from a closed beta, and it may turn out that the finished product is totally fine and there's no significant lag for 99% of the players. But with a game like that, where it is very like reaction and timing based, even just the idea.
Yeah.
That,
and has Ubisoft ever created a competitive multiplayer game?
They've made a lot.
Rainbow Six and stuff, I would say.
Okay, so the new Rainbow Six, I guess Siege. Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know they've got other games that are multiplayer.
They've had racing games,
but I guess I just don't
multiplayer.
But you see, like, I mean,
Cry.
yeah, but so all those games have multiplayer, but all those games, do any of those games have like, I mean, are they trying to compete with something like, your Call of Duties or your Titanfalls or something like that? And I think that they want For Honor to compete with those games. I don't think they want For Honor to be primarily a first-person or co-op or a single-player or co-op experience. I think they want it to be a competitive multiplayer juggernaut.
They definitely want it to be a competitive multiplayer-focused game.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's interesting to think about, like, while you were describing this initially, like just the perception of whether the networking is good in a game or not could affect like players' enjoyment of it. Like even if the networking was totally fine when it came out, if somebody like got killed by somebody else and felt like they shouldn't have, even though it was all legit, like they would say that the game is terrible.
And I think there is something fair to be said about, this game kind of plays itself more as a bit of a massively multiplayer fighting game. I get the impression, or a large-scale fighting game, which, a friend of mine is kind of like in a semi-high tier of competitive fighting games, and like he hates online play, like just in general. Other than for just getting online and goofing off and learning new things, like when it comes to actual competition, he's talking about things of like how fast his joystick interface is. So, I mean, going online in general is going to add lag, but even more so if you're talking about like the difference between peer-to-peer and dedicated servers. So, I think this argument's not, or this concern is not without its merits.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I think that I mean, if any of you guys have tried, now I can't claim to be good at the game. I can't even claim to be a super large fan of the game. But I will say that the number of complaints you hear about, well, I thought I hit that, or I knew I was in front of that. You don't really hear those when it comes to Rocket League. You might hear, well, that was lucky, or wow, oh my God. But it's never, it's never I actually hit that ball and the game, told me that I didn't, or something like that.
I guess that's the other thing because I don't know how For Honor compares to like a tightly balanced fighting game, like one-on-one fighting game. But Rocket League, like, I definitely have seen some lag, like some rubber banding and things like that. And that game, because the physics are so goofy, like it could even mask some of the lag issues. Like that game's just really hard to control in general. So you could make a good hit and it go flying off in a random direction. And is that lag? Probably not. Like it's probably just random physics, but. So maybe that masks some of the issue there.
Yeah, and I mean,
I would also wonder, because the last big multiplayer game they did put out was Rainbow Six Siege, which was a fully multiplayer-focused game that was meant to fit in that space. And I kind of wonder how that game did for them. I wonder if any fallout from that game could be influencing decisions here. I have no idea.
I can tell you that I know a lot of high schoolers who love Rainbow Six Siege.
I mean, I was about to ask, I wonder if that game just didn't sell very well, and maybe they're kind of hedging their bets a little on multiplayer stuff, but I don't really know. It sounds like it did well with the high school crowd.
Yeah.
It says it's looking like at least the PC version of Rainbow Six Siege used dedicated servers.
Yeah, I was trying to look that up, and it looked like it did use dedicated servers. So
yeah,
that's what I'm saying. I wonder if maybe the game didn't perform up to what they expected, so now they're trying to figure out a way to make the business sense work.
And it wasn't,
I don't know how well the game did.
Siege was not a juggernaut, but its fan base is very dedicated. There is a dedicated Siege fan base that's still playing pretty regularly.
Yeah. It's also, Ubisoft is a huge company, and these are different studios, and they might have completely different budgets and constraints and all that crazy stuff.
Right.
True.
Yeah. So
you just need to get on those Trackmania servers.
Yeah.
No, that's funny. Yeah. So I'm we'll see how that goes, but I think a general statement that basically everyone can agree with. Dedicated servers are better than P2P servers.
I totally agree with all of you on that.
Yes.
I support dedicated servers all day long.
Yeah.
The presence of lag, or even the thought that there might be lag in an online action game, are not good things to have.
Right. Next thing that we've got on the news agenda is something that I put in here just really quickly. So if you haven't heard, we have a new president, President Trump, and that's right. Donald Trump is now the president of the United States. He was sworn in several days ago, and one of the things that he has campaigned on, and one of the things that is looking to be more and more likely as his administration continues to move through its priorities, is imposing tariffs on items that are made outside of the United States, specifically businesses that do not manufacture their products here. In the U.S. FYI, ATACS is a United States-based podcast. We all live in the U.S. For all of our international listeners.
Well, maybe you guys do.
You do too. Raleigh is in the United States, just FYI.
Okay.
Right. So basically, anywhere between a 5 or 10% import tax could be imposed on imported products. And that can cause the cost of video games or consoles to go up 5 or 10%, or it could eat into the profit margin of companies 5 or 10%, depending on how they want to hit their price points, whether they want to cut into their profit margins or just pass that cost on to consumers. So one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up is because we could see an increase in the prices of video games, which has been relatively constant for several cycles now of consoles and games. But also, if this trade tariff does go through, and you do see the average price of a AAA title go from $60 to $70 or even $80, if this tariff goes away, I don't know. I mean, game companies have been trying to make a little extra money on AAA titles for a while now. So if this tariff goes through and the price of games goes up, I don't necessarily see it going back down if there's another administration sometime in the next 4 to 8 years. I was just kind of wondering what you guys thought about some of that stuff.
See, this is really why I pre-ordered the Switch, was to get it before this hits.
Playing forward
I'm on the ball here.
Shrewd.
It's hedging.
Hedging your bets.
Hedging against economic uncertainty.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Do we? So here's my lack of economic understanding. Would this affect digital goods?
Yeah.
Yes.
Question
probably
mark.
would.
Maybe not.
I would say yes, because if physical games go up in price, from my understanding, the video game industry is generally very respectful of the retailers of the world, the Walmarts and GameStops, and they won't launch a game cheaper on digital stores than they would physical.
That's true. The video game industry does still bow to brick and mortar stores in that regard.
Although that might change.
Guess
we don't know.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering in the more general sense, not specifically, because Nate's right, is that video game, if they were forced to raise the price on physical goods, they would match it with their digital offerings.
More than likely,
let's say for example, games that are digital only, like indie games or something, The Witness launched at $40. If that was launching in a year from now after this tax was imposed, would they would they still do that at $40, or would that have to go up?
No, it wouldn't have to go up, but I do think that there is a delta that is maintained between independent, digital distribution only games and the retail price points. So if the retail price of a AAA game goes from $60 to $80, and I'm just making numbers up, right? If it goes to $80, then an independent game, digital only on Steam, which might have launched for $30, might realize, hey, we can launch for $40 because the price of all the games in the industry just went up a little bit, and now we can make that much more profit without there necessarily being a giant pushback. So in some ways, the prices of video games for the entire industry are set based off of how much does a brand new AAA title cost to buy from Walmart. So if it's $60, then that means you're going to sell your indie game for $20 or $30 or whatever. If it's $80, then you might end up trying to squeeze a few more bucks out of the consumer because you can.
Well, I mean,
Right.
This gets into a debate that's probably much longer than the podcast, because right now we're speculating on if the tariff will happen, how much it will be for, and then you get into the economic theory. I don't know specifically about imports, but the economic theory is that typically with taxes, the consumer and the producer split the cost. It's a deadweight loss. And then we get into what about digital, or what about games which are developed, over, across a border? Are those going to be taxed? Steam is an American company. They do a lot of digital distribution, plus are the discs manufactured and printed for localized games, outside of, so there are just way too many factors here.
Yeah.
And I think, if we do have a big import tariff, who knows how it'll affect video games or the industry in general, or the economy in general. I mean, maybe video games will be the least of our concerns. There are some sort of wide-ranging impact.
What about guacamole? Because I'm pretty sure we get all of our avocados from Central America.
Well, I mean, trade wars, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
I don't think video games are something particularly worth. It's an interesting thing. It would be curious to see. My guess is that the costs would either be about the same or go up a little bit, depending on how big the tariff is and how many things were affected. And, consumer might have to pay a little more and the sellers might receive a little less. That's how taxes often work.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'll just have to wait and see. But I just kind of wanted to throw this out here during our news segment to say that, there's a lot of changes going on in the United States political climate, and the fact that it's reaching all the way to video game prices just kind of goes to show that this is a pretty far-reaching effect. This going on with the new administration, the new Congress, a whole bunch of new stuff. And no, we don't have the answers, but the fact that even this story is printed just goes to show how much of the United States political landscape is currently in flux right now.
Yeah, a lot of question marks out there right now.
Yeah. So the last thing that we had for a news item was Gabe Newell had an AMA on Reddit. Do we really want to go into this right now? Is there any?
Maybe.
I mean, since you mentioned it, I'll just say a few highlights that I found interesting. I thought it was interesting that he called out, he basically straight up acknowledged that customer support on Steam has been pretty bad in general.
Right.
And that that's one of the things they're working on the most right now is to make that better. The other thing that I found really interesting is he did just straight up say yes when someone asked, is Valve still working on any fully fledged single player games? Which, given their Dota success and Left 4 Dead and Team Fortress and all that success over the past few years, it kind of looked like they weren't. So that was interesting to hear just straight up. We'll see if that actually happens. And then someone followed that up by saying, any chance of a new IP that takes place in the Half-Life/Portal universe? And he straight up said yes. So who knows what Valve's actually working on, but it sounds like they will be something more than a Steam and Dota factory at some point.
That's a good news.
Yeah. I mean, they make good. I like Portal a lot. They make good games. So it is nice to see that they are doing something other than just working on Steam and Dota.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the most interesting takeaway for me.
Yeah, and
Yeah, a lot.
There are a bunch of questions in there.
yeah, and I'm not going to go through and read all of them. A lot of the stuff is just sort of, I don't know, expected, and some of it's just sort of like, I don't know, just sort of like record keeping stuff, like with Steam and things like that. So
Yeah.
I didn't consider it a
was-
very exciting AMA, but at the same
Yeah,
time, there was just some solid stuff.
Yeah, and there was some insight into like he basically said, I forget what the exact question was, but he basically said like, yeah, Valve is working and testing stuff all the time, and a lot of it gets canceled without us ever acknowledging it. So it just kind of feeds into like the mythos of Valve being this giant black box that is always working on weird stuff, and we never see it. Part of me someday would like to just see like the Valve archives of like things they've done and made that nobody's ever seen.
Versus
Right.
the Microsoft approach of hype a game for 3 years and then cancel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He also talked a lot about VR and how it's going to be big for them, so I'm sure they'll do more of that.
Right. All right. Well, so that's getting down near the end of this particular podcast. So we're gonna shoot over and just sort of ping around, see what people are planning on playing next. I can tell everyone that by the next time that we meet, I should be done with Doom. I don't have that much more left, so I'll probably end up finishing that here before next weekend. Still playing on Trails of Cold Steel, and that's progressing right along. It's an 80-hour RPG. These things take time. And then after I finish Doom, the next thing that I'm planning on starting is actually Uncharted 2. I bought the Uncharted collection for PS4, Uncharted 1 through 3 on one disc with all the remakes, and I finished Uncharted 1 a while ago, so I'm going to start up Uncharted 2 and then sort of try to finish out that series. Flex, what do you have coming up next?
Uncharted 2 is a good one, by the way. I'm going to keep poking at Picross as long as I keep enjoying it. This weekend, now that I have gone through Hitman and Final Fantasy 15, I have finally, after like a month hiatus, returned to Pokemon Moon. So I picked that back up this weekend. So I'll keep working at that, hopefully polish it off soonish. And I also just barely started Valhalla Cyberpunk Bartender Action, so I will be playing that as well.
Okay. All right, Will, what's on your docket coming up?
Well, I'm going to dive into the Phantom Pain. And I played...
Oh, you mean the 5th Metal Gear Solid game?
That's the one I'm talking about.
Is that really the 5th Metal Gear Solid game, though?
Yeah, if you count them, there's Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's 5 of them.
I thought it was V. Anyway.
Ooh, getting spoilery here.
Yeah, so that's a thing that I played Ground Zeroes this weekend. Didn't like it very much, but I've heard that the actual game is got some extra stuff going on. I also had the ability to change my controls to be something that was palatable to me. And so we're going to see, because I've heard that this is a really fun stealth sandbox. And, I mean, you guys just heard me talk about Deus Ex. I do like the stealth, and I do like the multiple ways of doing things. But also, the name Kojima is plastered everywhere in this game.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes,
it's amazing how much this guy wants you to know that this was his game. I mean, he really is about it. I tried to play 2 and found it impenetrable.
That's a good word.
That's a really good word. Yeah, good.
And
kind of on all fronts.
yeah, and so. Well, actually, I think it was 3. I think it was 3 because supposedly.
Oh, that's even more impenetrable.
Supposedly, these are some of the best stealth games, and I do consider myself a semi-connoisseur of stealth, so I felt like I should give it a go. That's where we are.
All right. Ron.
Multiple genre you can think of outside of puzzles, maybe, and just make yourself a connoisseur of it.
I don't know if I'd call them stealth games. I think they're in a genre called Kojima games.
Probably.
Yeah, that sounds fair. Ron, what about you? What you got coming up next?
There's a good chance I'll get through Alpha Protocol and start into something else, but I don't have that other thing picked out yet. So, Alpha Protocol.
All right. Nate, what about you?
We'll be mostly playing that Final Fantasy V Also looking forward to or keeping an eye on Neo, which is coming out in a little over a week.
Is that a game about the Matrix?
Maybe. It's a weird game. It's from Team Ninja. It's Japanese samurai, Dark Souls sort of inspired.
And you play as Geralt, right?
You play as Geralt of Rivia.
Oh, Dark Souls. I hear that's super hot.
Yeah,
Like,
Dark Souls is pretty
if you
cool.
say that your game is like Dark Souls, I think a lot of people will like
Roguelike, open world, Dark
Yep.
Souls.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is this the Dark Souls of ninjas?
It's the Dark Souls of Geralt samurai.
Would you say it's got
Geralt
Souls-like combat? Is that what you'd say?
Yep.
You
It
know,
actually does look kind of cool. Is it
Yeah.
in the Drakengard franchise or what franchise?
I think it's
a new IP.
A new
New
franchise.
IP? Okay.
A new intellectual property.
Yeah. It looks interesting. I played a alpha or beta version of it at some point last year, and it was kind of cool. I'll see what the reviews look like about that and decide whether to jump on it or not.
all right. Well, I'd say that probably just about sums it up, guys. We've talked about a lot of video games and also a lot of news. So this was a long one.
That was podcast.
That was podcast. So we will be back in your feed in about 2 weeks for ATACS episode 7, and
we will feed you with more video games.
We will feed you with more video games, and by then I'm sure we'll have some more new and depressing Nintendo Switch news and everything else. So anyway, thanks for listening. I have been your host, Paul from Atlanta, and joining us here at our roundtable were Flex from Raleigh, Will from Greenville, Ryan from New York City, and Mr. Nate from Wendell, and we will see you next time.